A widowed rancher inherited a remote ranch. Never knew 150 wild horses were living there. He came for an empty house in the high country, but instead found the earth shaking under thundering hooves. A forgotten valley guarded not by fences, but by a fierce woman with a vow carved in blood and memory. What seemed like a blessing turns into a storm. Rustlers circle. The railroad drives its iron stakes into the land. And the lawman brings papers sharper than bullets, but hidden in. The shadows is a boy frail, stubborn, carrying a secret promise that could save them all, or break them apart. Now, the widowed rancher must choose. Surrender the herd and the only family he's ever known, or stand against powerful men who will stop at nothing to claim the valley. The horses thunder, the church bell tolls, the rifle cocks in the night. Will he fight for justice and keep the wild herd free or lose everything again? Comment below and tell me where in the world you're joining from. And if this story made you pause for a moment, hit that subscribe button for more. Afternoon sun casts long shadows across the weathered boards of Miller's General Store as Andrew Merriman tucked a telegram into his vest pocket. His calloused fingers traced the edge of the paper through the worn fabric, as if touching it might make the news feel more real. The message had been brief, but its weight pressed heavy on his mind. His uncle's ranch in the Colorado Highlands was now his need. Anything else today, Mr. Merriman? Old Miller's voice carried from behind the counter, where he was measuring out coffee beans into a brown paper sack. Andrew cleared his throat. Reckon I'll need some flour. And a lantern wick. He paused, scanning the shelves. Coffee too, if you've got enough there. The shopkeeper nodded, his spectacles catching the late afternoon light. The familiar sense of leather, tobacco, and dried goods filled the air as Andrew gathered his supplies. Each item represented another step toward a journey he wasn't sure he wanted to take. The bell above the door chimed as he stepped out onto the wooden sidewalk. Dust devils danced across the street, stirring up memories of another time, another place of Sarah. His late wife would have known what to say about this inheritance. She always had a way of seeing God's purpose in unexpected turns. Back at his modest homestead, Andrew packed his saddlebags with methodical care. The supplies from Miller's store went in first, followed by his few personal items. A spare shirt, his mother's Bible, a tin cup that had survived countless campfires. His old mule Chester stood patient as ever while Andrew secured the loads. Sun was already dropping toward the western horizon when Andrew swung into the saddle of his bay horse, Thunder. Chester fell into step behind, the lead rope swaying gently between them. The familiar creak of leather and jingle of tack provided a rhythm to their departure. Hours passed as they climbed steadily into higher country. The air grew thinner, carrying the sharp scent of pine and sage. Andrew kept one eye on the deepening shadows, knowing he'd need to make camp soon. As they crested a final ridge, he drew Thunder to a halt. The reins going slack in his hands, the valley below stretched out like a painting come to life. Golden grass rippled in the evening breeze, and stands of aspen threw long shadows across the meadows. But it was the movement that caught his eye, a living river of horses flowing across the landscape. Andrew's breath caught in his throat. The telegram hadn't mentioned this. Nearly 150 wild horses moved as one across the valley floor, their hooves creating a distant thunder that echoed off the surrounding hills. Dark bodies and flowing manes blended together in the fading light, punctuated by flashes of white and dappled gray. "Lord above," he whispered, removing his hat. Thunder shifted beneath him, ears pricked forward at the sight of his wild cousins below. Finding a sheltered spot beneath a cluster of pines, Andrew made camp for the night. The routine of setting up helped steady his racing thoughts, gathering wood, starting a small fire, laying out his bedroll. But his eyes kept straying to the valley below, where the herd had settled into grazing as dusk deepened into night. The coffee pot bubbled on the fire, as Andrew sat with his back against a log, tin cup warming his hands. Stars began to appear. Overhead, bright and clear in the mountain air. The night was alive with sound, the crack and pop of his small fire. The whisper of wind in the pines and always the movement of the herd below. Hooves on earth, occasional whinnies carrying up the slope. The shuffle of large bodies moving through grass-dot sleep proved elusive. Andrew lay in his bedroll, listening to the night sounds and trying to make sense of what lay before him. His uncle's ranch had been a distant mystery mentioned in occasional letters visited. Now it had become his responsibility, along with a herd of wild horses he hadn't known existed. Thunder nickered softly from where he was picketed, and Chester's long ears twitched at every sound from the valley. The animals were as restless as their master, sensing the presence of the herd below Dot in the deepest part of the night. Andrew found himself sitting up, unable to find rest. The fire had burned down to coals, casting a faint red glow that barely reached beyond his boots. He pulled Sarah's Bible from his saddlebag, though it was too dark to read. The familiar texture of its worn leather cover brought a measure of comfort. What am I supposed to do with this, Sarah? He whispered into the darkness. The question hung in the cool mountain air, unanswered. His wife had always been the one to see hope in challenging situations, to find purpose where he saw only obstacles. The hole left by her passing felt particularly deep tonight, faced with this unexpected inheritance. The herd moved again in the valley below. The sound of their passage a constant reminder of the task ahead. Andrew had worked with horses all his life, but never anything like this. These were wild creatures, free as the wind that shaped the highlands around them. The thought of trying to contain or manage such a force seemed almost presumptuous. His uncle must have had a plan, a reason for everything. But whatever wisdom the old man might have shared was now lost, leaving Andrew to figure it out on his own. He thought of the neighboring ranches back home, the careful balance of grazing rights, water access, and fence lines that kept peace between neighbors. How did wild horses fit into that kind of order? As the night wore on, the sounds from the valley began to take on a different quality. What had first seemed chaotic slowly revealed its own patterns, the movement of smaller groups within the larger herd. The calls between mares and the foals, the deeper tones of stallions maintaining their watch. It was its own kind of music, as complex as any church choir Sarah used to sing in. The eastern sky began to lighten, turning the clouds to pale purple and gold. Andrew had dozed off and on, but true rest had eluded him. He rose stiffly, his bones protesting the cold ground. As he stirred up the fire and set coffee to boil, the valley below came slowly into focus. The herd had shifted during the night, moving closer to the base of the ridge where he camped. In the growing light, he could make out individual animals. Black stallion with a white blaze, a dun mare with a colt at her side. A group of yearlings playing at the edge of the main group. Their coats were rough from winter, but beneath the shaggy hair lay the promise of fine horseflesh. Andrew poured his coffee and watched the sun rise over his inheritance. The telegram in his vest pocket seemed to carry a different weight now. This wasn't just about a piece of land or a ramshackle ranch house. He had been handed something wild and beautiful, something that would require wisdom he wasn't sure he possessed. Thunder stamped a foot and tossed his head, drawing Andrew's attention. The bay horse was staring intently at the herd below, his nostrils flaring to catch their scent on the morning breeze. Even Chester had stopped his grazing to watch, his long ears pointed forward with unusual interest. "Reckon we've all got some figuring to do," Andrew said softly, speaking as much to himself as to his animals. The morning light caught the steam, rising from his coffee cup, carrying it away on the wind that never seemed to rest in these highlands. Somewhere in the valley below, a stallion called out, the sound echoing off the surrounding hills like a welcome or perhaps a warning. The first rays of sunlight painted the valley in shades of gold when Andrew broke camp. Thunder's hooves crunched through morning frost as they descended the ridge, following what remained of an old wagon track. Chester plodded behind them, his long ears swiveling at every new sound. The wild herd had moved further down the valley, leaving only trampled grass and hoofprints as evidence of their passing. Andrew kept one eye on the distant dust they kicked up while searching for signs of the ranch house. His uncle's letters. had mentioned it sat near a grove of cottonwoods, and sure enough, he spotted their pale trunks gleaming in the morning light. The house emerged from the shadows like a ship run aground. Weather-beaten boards had gone silver with age, and the roof sagged in the middle like a tired horse's back. The front porch listed to one side, its steps half-rotted. Around the house, fence posts stuck up at odd angles where sections of corral had collapsed. Andrew dismounted slowly, his joints stiff from the cold night. He looped Thunder's reins around a sturdy post and approached the house, boots crunching on gravel. The windows stared back at him, dark and empty. "Hello?" He called out, more from habit than expectation. Only the wind answered, whistling through. Gaps in the siding. The front door hung, crooked on its hinges. Andrew pushed it open carefully, wincing at the screech of rusted metal. Dust motes danced in the shaft of sunlight that followed him inside. The main room held the remnants of a life abandoned, table with 3 chairs, shelves with tin cans and crockery, a pot-bellied stove thick with rust. His boot heel caught on something, and he looked down to find a faded rag doll lying in the dirt. He bent to pick it up, wondering what child had left it behind. The sharp click of a rifle being cocked froze him in place. "Don't move." The voice was female, steady and cold as mountain water. "Stand up slow and keep your hands where I can see them." Andrew straightened carefully, arms raised to shoulder height. "Ma'am, I can explain. Turn around." He did as instructed, coming face to face with a woman who held her rifle with the ease of long practice. She was dressed in practical clothes, a man's work shirt, worn trousers, and scuffed boots. Her black hair was pulled back in a long braid, and her features spoke of mixed heritage, Apache if he had to guess. Age was hard to determine, somewhere in her 40s perhaps, with lines of care around her eyes. "You're trespassing," she said flatly. "This land isn't yours to wander." "Actually, ma'am, it is." Andrew kept his voice calm, though his heart hammered against his ribs. "I'm Andrew Merriman. My uncle, James Merriman's nephew." Her eyes narrowed. "Prove it." Moving slowly, Andrew reached into his vest pocket with 2 fingers. "I have the telegram here and a letter from his lawyer." She studied the papers without lowering her rifle. Something in her posture shifted as she read, but the weapon remained steady. "I'm Liza Yazzie," she said finally. "I've been watching over this place and the herd since your uncle passed. My brother made a promise to protect those horses, and I mean to honor it." "I saw them last night," Andrew said. Never expected anything like that. The telegram just mentioned the ranch. "The ranch is one thing. The horses are another." Liza's voice took on an edge. "Having papers that say you own this land doesn't mean you own them. They're free creatures, and they'll stay that way." Andrew thought of Sarah then, of how she'd nursed injured birds and stray cats, never turning away a creature in need. "I'm not here to harm them," he said softly, "or to sell them off to traders. My wife," his voice caught for a moment, "my late wife would never forgive me if I did that to such beautiful animals." Something in Lisa's expression softened slightly. The rifle barrel dipped toward the floor, though her finger remained near the trigger. "Fine words," she said, "but I've heard plenty of those before. Then give me a chance to prove them true." Andrew lowered his arms slowly. "I reckon we both have promises to keep here." Liza studied him for a long moment, then nodded once. "You'll be wanting to check the house, I expect." "Kitchen still works, more or less. I keep some supplies here." The kitchen turned out to be a small room off the main area, with a wood stove that looked more trustworthy than the one in the front room. Liza moved around it with familiar ease, setting a pot of beans to warm. Andrew noticed she kept the rifle within easy reach. They ate in silence at the scarred kitchen table, the beans plain but filling. Through the window, Andrew could see Thunder and Chester grazing in what remained of the corral, seemingly content despite the broken fences. "Your uncle was a good man," Liza said suddenly. "He understood about the horses. My brother worked for him, helping to protect the herd from rustlers and traders who'd run them into the ground. When Thomas died, I took up his promise." Andrew nodded, choosing his words carefully. How long have you been watching over them? 3 years now. Liza's hand moved unconsciously to touch something at her neck. A leather cord, what looked like a small medicine pouch. The traders still come sometimes, thinking the old man's death means the horses are free for the taking. They learn? Different. The sun was setting by the time they finished talking, shadows growing long across the kitchen floor. Andrew found an old lamp in a cupboard and cleaned it out, trimming the wick with his pocket knife. The flame caught easily, spreading. A warm glow through the room. First light in here for a while, Liza observed. You planning to stay then? Seems I am. Andrew adjusted the lamp's flame. Though there's plenty of work to be done, that there is. Liza stood, collecting her rifle. I camp up in the hills. Mostly keep watch over the herd. They'll be bedding down in the north meadow tonight if the wind holds. She paused at the door, her expression unreadable in the lamplight. Your uncle used to say a man's word is worth more than any paper he carries. We'll see what yours is worth, Andrew Merriman. After she left, Andrew sat at the kitchen table for a long time, watching the lamp flame dance. The house creaked and settled around him, no longer quite as empty as it had been that morning. Outside, a coyote called from the ridgeline and somewhere in the darkness. He heard the distant sound of the herd moving through their valley. He took out Sarah's Bible and set it on a table, its familiar presence a comfort in this strange new place. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, broken fences to mend, a roof to patch, and a wary trust to build with Liza Yazzie. But for now, the lamp burned steady in the gathering dark, marking the beginning of something he couldn't yet name. Dawn painted the eastern sky in pale gold when Andrew stepped onto the weathered porch. The morning air held the bite of mountain chill, and his breath formed small clouds as he pulled on his work gloves. He found Liza already waiting by the broken corral, her dark hair neatly braided, a canvas satchel slung across her shoulder. Thought we might walk the boundaries, she said by way of greeting. See what you're getting yourself into. Andrew nodded, noting how she said what rather than where. They set out across the dew-dampened grass, their boots leaving dark prints. Behind them, the valley opened before them like pages of a book, each step revealing new details Andrew hadn't noticed in his first rushed arrival. Spring's over this way, Liza said, leading him toward a cluster of cottonwoods. Never runs dry, even in August. Your uncle put in the stonework around it himself. The spring bubbled up clear and sweet between carefully placed rocks, forming a small pool before running off down the slope. Moss grew thick on the stones, bright green against the gray. Good water, Andrew said, kneeling to taste it. Sarah, my wife, she always said good water was God's first gift to any ranch. Liza's expression softened slightly at the mention of Sarah. The horses favor it, especially the Mares with foals. They come down most mornings when the sun's just up. They continued on, Liza pointing out landmarks. A worn trail wound up through scattered pine trees to where she kept her lookout. Another path led to a natural salt lick where the horses gathered, the ground around it trampled by countless hooves. This is more than I expected, Andrew admitted as they paused to rest on a fallen log. The morning sun had burned away the chill, and sweat dampened his shirt collar. One man can't manage all this alone. No, Liza agreed. He can't. She pulled dried apple slices from her satchel, offering him some. Your uncle knew that. Why he worked with my brother, and later with... Would you be willing? Andrew began, then paused, choosing his words carefully. That is, I could use help. Getting things back in order, for the herd's sake, if nothing else. Liza studied him for a long moment. For the herd, she said finally. Yes, but we do this my way when it comes to the horses. They're not to be broken or sold. By early afternoon, they had returned to the ranch house. Andrew set to work on the corral, pulling rotted posts and measuring for new ones. The familiar labor felt good, giving his hands purpose while his mind worked through all he had seen. Sound of distant hoofbeats made him look up. 3 riders moved along the ridge to the north, their figures dark against the sky. Through his uncle's old field glasses, Andrew could make out rifles slung across their saddles. Rustlers, Liza sighed quietly. She had materialized beside him, her own gaze fixed on the riders. They come every few months, testing, seeing if anyone's still guarding the herd, just watching today. For now, her hand rested near the rifle she always carried. They'll be back, though. Always are. The riders eventually disappeared beyond the ridge, but their presence left an uneasy feeling in the air. Andrew worked until sunset, managing to replace 2 fence posts and secure a length of rail. His muscles ached, reminding him how long it had been since he'd done such labor. Inside, Liza had lit the lamp and set out a simple supper of cornbread and coffee. They ate in companionable silence until Andrew spoke. "Sometimes I wonder if Sarah wasn't right about this land," he said, breaking his cornbread into careful pieces. "She used to say God made these valleys as gardens, meant for growing good things. Not for men to fight over. Your God, maybe." Liza's voice held no malice, just quiet certainty. "My people know the land has its own spirit. Men bring their greed to it like a disease. The land itself just is." "But surely there's providence in how things unfold," Andrew persisted, "in how we're led to where we're needed." Lisa smiled faintly. "Is that what led you here? Providence?" Before Andrew could answer, the stamp of horses and crunch of wheels on gravel came from outside. Lamplight caught the surprise on both their faces. Visitors at this hour were rare and rarely welcome. The door opened without a knock, spilling yellow lamplight onto the face of a well-dressed man in his 40s. Behind him stood 2 others, carrying surveying equipment and rolled maps. "Evening," the first man said smoothly. "Thomas Granger, Western Pacific Railroad. Hope we're not interrupting supper." His smile didn't reach his eyes as he looked between Andrew and Liza. "You are," Lisa said flatly. But Andrew gestured for them to enter. Granger spread his maps across the kitchen table, barely missing the cornbread plate. His fingers traced lines drawn in red ink, cutting straight through the heart of the valley. "Companies. Pushing the line through by spring," he explained. "This valley provides the perfect grade for the tracks. We'll meet about 200 feet of clearance, plus space for a water tower near that spring we passed. The spring belongs to the horses," Liza said. Her voice was quiet but carried steel beneath it. Granger's smile tightened. "Man, I'm sure. You understand that progress can't be held back by a bunch of wild animals. The railroad survey crew has already marked the route. They have government contracts to fulfill." "This is private land," Andrew said, studying the maps. The red line seemed to mock him, slashing through the peaceful valley he'd walked that morning. "Technically, yes." Granger pulled out a sheaf of papers. "But the Railroad Act gives us certain rights of way. We're prepared to offer fair compensation." "Of course, though that offer won't last indefinitely." Andrew felt Liza's eyes on him, waiting. The lamp flickered, making shadows dance across the maps and faces gathered around the table. In that moment, he saw clearly what his uncle had protected, what Liza still fought for. Not just land or horses, but something older and more vital. "I'll need to review these documents," he said carefully, "with my lawyer." Granger's smile vanished entirely. "Don't take too long, Mr. Merriman. Progress is coming, whether you're ready or not." He'd gathered his maps with sharp movements. "We'll be back next week for your answer." After they left, the kitchen felt smaller, as if the maps had stolen space. Along with peace, Liza stood at the window, watching until the railroad men's lanterns disappeared down the valley. "They won't stop," she said softly. "Men like that never do." Andrew looked down at the table where Granger's maps had lain. The valley that had seemed so full of possibility that morning now felt fragile, threatened. He thought of the wild horses, running free, of the spring bubbling up through his uncle's carefully placed stones, of Liza's quiet dedication to a promise made. "No," he agreed, "but neither will we." Dawn broke cold and clear over the valley. Andrew stood on the porch, coffee cup warming his hands as he watched the survey crew's stakes catch the first light. They dotted the land like thorns, their red cloth markers fluttering in the breeze. Each one felt like an accusation. He paced, the weathered boards, boots creaking with each turn. The coffee grew cold, forgotten. From inside came the quiet sounds of Liza preparing breakfast, the cast iron pan scraping against the stove. The routine felt strange, almost domestic, though tension hung thick in the air. "You'll wear a hole in those boards," Liza said, appearing in the doorway. She handed him a plate of biscuits and salt pork. "Eat. We have a long ride ahead." Andrew accepted the plate, but couldn't settle. "Maybe we should just know." Liza's voice was firm. "We ride to town. We check the deed, then we decide." The sun was well up by the time they saddled their horses. Andrew's bay shifted restfully, picking up his anxiety. Liza's pinto stood steady as she checked the cinch, her movements sure and practiced. They packed light, just water, jerky, and the precious letter proving Andrew's inheritance. The journey to town wound through steep canyons where his shadow still clung to the walls. Their horses' hooves clicked against stone, echoing off the narrow walls. A creek crossed their path 3 times, the water running high with late summer rains. Red-tailed hawks circled overhead, their cries carrying far in the clear air. They rode mostly in silence, each lost in thought. At one point, rounding a bend, they startled a small herd of deer. The animals bounded away, white tails flashing like signals. Andrew watched them disappear into the brush. "My uncle," he said finally. "What kind of man was he?" "With the horses, I mean." Liza was quiet so long he thought she wouldn't answer. He understood them, she said at last. "Respected their freedom. When my brother first brought him to see the herd, your uncle just watched them for hours." "Didn't talk about breaking them or selling them? Just watched." "Like you do." "Yes." She adjusted her hat against the climbing sun. "He made my brother a promise. When my brother died, he kept that promise with me. The herd would stay free." The town appeared around midday, a cluster of wooden buildings drowsing in the heat. They tied their horses at the water trough, dust coating their clothes and faces from the ride. The county office occupied the ground floor of the courthouse. Its windows grimy with age dot inside, the clerk looked up from his ledger, spectacles sliding down his nose. The office smelled of paper and ink, with rows of leather-bound books lining the walls. A clock ticked steadily in the corner. "May I help you?" His voice was thin, reedy. Andrew placed his uncle's letter on the counter. "I need to confirm a deed. Merriman Ranch, up Cedar Creek Valley." The clerk's fingers traced down columns of spidery writing, mumbling to himself. He pulled one book, then another, pages crackling as he turned them. Ah, yes, Merriman. He adjusted. His spectacles. Deed filed 1873. 640 acres, more or less. Water rights from Cedar Creek included. "And the railroad?" Liza asked. "What claims have they filed?" More page turning. The clerk's expression changed. Slightly. Western Pacific filed rights of way 12 months ago. Standard grant under the Railroad Act 2, 100 feet, each side of the proposed line, plus station grounds where needed. Andrew felt his stomach sink. They can just take it? Cut right through? The act gives him considerable authority. The clerk seemed apologetic, especially with government contracts for mail service. They're required to offer compensation, of course. "The compensation," Liza said, her voice hard. "What about the horses?" "The spring they need?" The clerk blinked at her. "Ma'am, the law doesn't generally concern itself with wild animals. They're considered part of the public domain. Outside," thunder rumbled in the distance. Andrew leaned heavily on the counter, the wood smooth from years of similar gestures. The deed that had seemed so promising now felt worthless in his pocket. "Maybe," he said quietly as they left the office. "Maybe we should sell, before things get worse." "Before someone gets hurt?" Liza stopped so suddenly he nearly ran into her. Her eyes blazed as she turned to face him. "Is that how you honor your uncle?" Her words were sharp as arrowheads. "How you keep faith with the dead? By giving up at the first challenge?" "It's not the first," Andrew protested. "The railroad has the law behind them. They've got money, influence. What do we have? We have promises to keep." Liza's voice softened slightly. Your uncle understood that. Some things matter more than law or money. Money. Dark clouds were gathering as they mounted up for the ride home. The air felt heavy, charged with coming rain. They pushed their horses harder, trying to beat the storm. The first drops fell as they crested the final ridge. Below, the valley spread out, green and gold in the strange stormlight. Near the ranch house, the wild herd had gathered, perhaps 100 horses bunched together. Their coats gleamed wet in the rain, manes tossing as thunder rolled overhead. Andrew reined in, struck by the sight. The horses seemed to glow against the darkening sky, vital and free. The survey stakes looked small and temporary beside such. Life, they know, Liza said, softly. Animals sensed trouble coming. Lightning flickered in the clouds. The herd moved restlessly, but stayed close to the ranch house as if seeking shelter. Or protection. Andrew thought of his uncle watching them for hours, seeing what he now saw, not just animals, but something worth preserving, worth fighting for. You're right, he said. Rain ran down his face, but he didn't wipe it away. We can't abandon them, Liza nodded, satisfaction and relief briefly crossing her features. They rode down together through the strengthening storm toward the house and the waiting herd. The survey stakes rattled in the wind, their red flags snapping like surrender signals, but Andrew wasn't surrendering. Not anymore. The rooster had not yet announced dawn when Andrew stepped onto the creaking porch. Stars still dotted the sky, though a pale glow touched the eastern horizon. He found Liza already there, 2 steaming cups of coffee in her hands. She offered him one without a word. Much obliged, he said, accepting the warm cup. The morning air held an autumn chill that made the coffee welcome. Liza gestured toward the broken sections of fence, visible in the dim light, and we start there. The herd respects boundaries, but only if they're solid. Andrew nodded, sipping his coffee. The fence line stretched before them like a wounded snake, posts leaning and wire sagging. It would be a full day's work, maybe more. But the familiar prospect of hard labor steadied him. This, at least, he understood. They gathered their tools as the sun crept over the mountains. Andrew loaded a wagon with posts, wire, and tools while Liza prepared the horses. Her movements were sure and gentle, speaking soft words in Apache too. Each animal as she worked, the morning warmed slowly as they began their task. Andrew dug post holes, his shoulders straining against the rocky soil. Liza worked alongside him, matching his pace. She knew her way around tools as well as any ranch hand he'd ever worked with. Your brother teach you this? Andrew asked, wiping sweat from his brow. Some? Liza tamped earth around a fresh post. But mostly I learned watching, doing. The land teaches if you listen. They fell into a rhythm as the sun climbed higher. Dig, set, tamp. String wire, stretch it tight, secure. The work was honest and straightforward, unlike the tangle of legal threats they faced. Each repaired section felt like a small victory. Near midday, the wild herd drifted closer, curious about their activity. A magnificent black stallion led them, his coat gleaming in the sun. He watched the repairs with intelligent eyes, as if assessing their work. That's Stormcrow, Liza said, following Andrew's gaze. He's led the herd 5 years now. Wise one, bat horse. Knows every trail in these hills. Andrew leaned on his shovel, admiring the stallion's proud bearing. Never seen a horse quite like him. Not many have. Pride colored Liza's voice. My brother named him. Said he appeared suddenly one day, like a storm rolling in. They broke for a simple lunch of cornbread and dried apples, sitting in the shade of a cottonwood tree. The herd grazed peacefully nearby, their presence somehow comforting. The afternoon passed in steady work. Andrew found himself watching Liza, when she wasn't looking. The sure grace of her movements, the quiet strength in her hands. She was nothing like his late wife. Yet something about her steadfast nature touched a lonely place in his heart. As the sun began to set, they loaded the remaining tools into the wagon. Their shadows stretched long across the repaired fence line, a day's work made visible in straight posts and tight wire. We made good progress, Andrew said, satisfaction warming his voice. We did. Liza's small smile held approval. You work? Well, for a town man. Back at the ranch house, Liza stirred a pot of venison stew while Andrew built up the fire. The kitchen filled with savory smells that made his stomach growl. He set out tin plates and spoons on the rough wooden table, conscious of the domestic feeling of the moment. Liza served the stew, the steam rising in the lamplight. Andrew reached for his spoon but fumbled it, sending it clattering to the floor. The unexpected clatter startled them both. Then, surprising them further, Liza laughed. It was a warm sound, rich and genuine. Andrew found himself joining in, the tension of recent days breaking like spring ice. Perhaps, Liza said, eyes twinkling, we should tie it to your wrist? Might help. Andrew chuckled, retrieving the spoon. Though I reckon I'd find some way to tangle myself up. They shared the meal in comfortable silence, broken by occasional soft comments. The stew was hearty and well seasoned with wild herbs Liza had gathered. Andrew couldn't remember the last time he'd enjoyed a meal so much. The peaceful evening shattered with the sharp crack of distant gunfire. 3 shots in. Quick succession echoing off the valley walls. Both of them stiffened. Earlier warmth forgotten. Rustlers, Liza said grimly. Testing our defenses. They spent a restless night, taking turns watching. But no more shots came, and the herd remained calm under the starlit sky. Dawn found them, mounting up, rifles across their saddles. They rode out carefully, alert for any movement in the early morning shadows. The dew had settled heavy overnight, making tracks easy to read. They found the first cut fence near the eastern pasture. Clean cuts through the wire, professional work. Hoof prints marked the damp earth, showing where horses had been driven hard. At least 6 riders, Liza said, studying the ground. Maybe more. They followed the trail to a stand of oak trees. Rope burns scored the bark where horses had been tied. Scattered feed and cigarette butts showed where the rustlers had waited. They were watching us, Andrew realized. All day while we worked, waiting for dark. But the herd knows this valley. Better than any thieves. Liza pointed to tracks showing where the horses had scattered into rough country. Stormcrow would have led them to safety. Andrew knelt in the trampled grass, his heart heavy with the violation of their peace. Without conscious thought, he bowed his head. Lord, he prayed aloud, give us strength for what's coming. Show us the path through this valley of troubles. He felt Liza kneel beside him, her shoulder touching his. She didn't speak, but her presence joined his prayer. Their faiths might differ in form, but in that moment they reached for the same. Truth. They were not alone in this fight. The morning sun warmed their backs as they rose. Birds called in the trees, and somewhere in the distance a horse nickered. Life continued, whether they were ready or not. They'll be back, Liza said quietly. Yes. Andrew checked his rifle, making sure it was loaded. But we'll be ready. They rode back to the ranch house together, the hoofbeats of their horses falling into matching rhythm. The day's work waited. More fences to mend, horses to watch, a home to defend. But somehow the burden felt lighter, shared between them. The sun hung low in the western sky, painting the clouds in shades of amber and purple. Andrew sat on the porch, rifle across his knees, watching shadows lengthen across the valley. Beside him, Liza cleaned her own weapon with practiced care, her movements steady and sure. The first shot cracked through the evening, quiet like breaking glass. Both of them were on their feet in an instant, scanning the growing darkness. 3 riders emerged from the tree line, moving fast toward the grazing herd. There! Liza pointed to where more shadows detached themselves from the brush, circling. Wide to flank the horses. Andrew raised his rifle, taking careful aim above the nearest rider's head. The warning shot echoed off the valley walls. Liza's rifle spoke next, kicking up dirt near another rustler's horse. The raiders pulled up short, clearly not expecting armed resistance. Their curses carried clearly through the still air. One fired. Back, the bullet splintering wood far to Andrew's left. That's close enough. Andrew's voice boomed across the darkening pasture. Next shot won't be a warning. The rustlers wheeled their horses, retreating into the gathering dusk. Hoofbeats faded into silence, leaving only the nervous shuffling of the herd and the call of an evening bird. "They'll think twice now," Liza said, reloading her rifle. "But they'll be back." Andrew nodded grimly. "With more men likely." Unlikely. They kept watch through the night, taking turns dozing in chairs on the porch. The herd settled, gradually. Storm Crow standing guard at its edges like a dark sentinel. Morning brought clear skies and unwelcome visitors. 5 riders approached from town just before noon, led by Mason Burke, the general store owner. They dismounted in the yard, dust coating their boots. Andrew noticed how they kept their distance from Liza, who stood quietly by the corral. "Merriman?" Burke called out. "Came to talk sense into you?" He mopped his face with a bandana. "Railroads offering fair prices for the land. Better take it before things get worse." "That's so." Andrew leaned against the porch post, keeping his voice neutral. Another rider. Tom Wesley from the saloon spat in the dirt. "Them rustlers ain't going nowhere. And railroad men, they play rough when crossed." His eyes slid toward Liza. "Especially with folks keeping questionable company." Heat rose in Andrew's chest. "Mind your tongue, Wesley." "Just saying what everyone's thinking," Wesley sneered. "Ain't natural, white man living out here with a half-breed." Andrew's movement was lightning. Fast. 3 long strides brought him toe-to-toe with Wesley. "That lady there has more honor in her little finger than you've shown in your whole life." His voice was deadly quiet. "You want to keep your teeth? You'll apologize now?" Wesley's hand twitched toward his gun, but Burke stepped between them. "Easy now. We're just here to help, Andrew. Don't want to see you ruined over this foolishness. My mind's made up." Andrew didn't back down. "This land, these horses, they stay free. Now I suggest you all ride out while you can still sit a saddle." The threat hung in the air like gun smoke. After a long moment, Burke shrugged. "Your funeral." He mounted up, the others following. Wesley glared, but said nothing more. Andrew watched, until they disappeared down the trail. When he turned, Liza stood closer than he expected, her dark eyes unreadable. "You didn't have to do that," she said softly. "Yes, I did." The day passed slowly, tension thrumming beneath every quiet moment. As evening approached, they sat at the kitchen table, lamp burning low. Neither felt much like sleeping. "My brother knew he was dying," Liza said suddenly, breaking the silence. "Consumption took him slow. His last clear day, he made me promise to protect the herd." She traced patterns on the wooden tabletop. Said they were the last truly free things in this valley, that their spirits carried the old ways. Andrew closed his eyes, memory washing over him. "Sarah, my wife, she held on 3 days after the fever peaked. Wouldn't let go until I promised to keep living, really living." His voice roughened, "Not just existing." "Did you keep that promise?" "Tried to. Failed mostly." He opened his. Eyes met her steady gaze. "Until now, maybe." Liza nodded, understanding in her face. "Promises to the dying carry special weight. They see clear somehow at the end." "Your brother," Andrew said carefully. "He must have been quite a man." He was. Pride and grief mingled in her voice. "Taught me everything. Riding, shooting, healing herbs. How to read sign and weather. Said being half Apache, half white meant I had to be twice as strong." She smiled faintly. "Twice as stubborn?" "Two. That I believe," Andrew said, earning a soft laugh. They talked through the night, sharing memories like precious stones turned in lamplight. Andrew spoke of Sarah's garden, how she sang while working the soil. Liza described her brother, teaching her to gentle wild horses, the patience and respect it required. Outside, moonlight silvered the grass. The herd grazed peacefully, Stormcrow's dark form moving among them like a protecting spirit. The night air carried the scent of sage and prairie flowers, a sweet counterpoint to the bitterness of coming conflict. "They'll try to break us," Liza said finally, as false dawn began to pale the eastern sky. The railroad, the rustlers, the town, they'll all push hard. Andrew reached across the table, covered her hand with his. The touch was brief but steady. Let them try. The lamp burned low, casting warm light on their faces. In that quiet moment, something shifted between them, an understanding deeper than words, forged in shared grief and common purpose. Beyond the walls, the wild herd moved like shadows through the sage, free still under the fading stars. The first rays of sunlight painted the eastern sky in delicate strokes of pink and gold. Andrew stepped out onto the weathered porch, coffee, cup warming his hands against the morning chill. His eyes swept the valley, checking the herd's location. A habit formed over recent weeks. That movement near the corral caught his attention. A small figure stood there, so still he might have been. A fence post in a dim light. Andrew set his cup down carefully, one hand dropping to his gun belt. Liza, he called softly through the screen door. You might want to see this. She appeared beside him, wiping her hands on her apron. The moment her eyes found the figure, she gasped. The sound was unlike anything Andrew had heard before, part joy, part fear. Samuel. She was down the steps in an instant, crossing the yard with swift strides. The boy turned at her voice. He was thin as a reed, perhaps 12 years old, with Liza's high cheekbones and dark eyes. His clothes were trail-dusty, but well-mended. When Liza reached him, he straightened his shoulders despite obvious exhaustion. Aunt Liza, he said formally, then melted into her embrace. Andrew approached slowly, not wanting to intrude on their reunion. As he drew closer, he could hear the boy's labored breathing. The morning air was cool, but sweat beaded on Samuel's forehead. Liza held the boy at arm's length, examining him with worried eyes. You're burning up. How long have you been traveling? 3 days. Samuel's voice was soft but determined. I had to come. The horses. A cough interrupted him, harsh and deep. Let's get you inside, Andrew said, stepping forward. I'm Andrew Merriman, Samuel nodded solemnly. The new rancher. The people in town spoke of you. He swayed slightly, and Andrew steadied him with a gentle hand dot in the kitchen. Liza settled. Samuel at the table while Andrew built up the fire. She pressed a cup of water into the boy's hands, then began brewing willow bark tea. His mother's cousin was keeping him on the reservation, Liza explained to Andrew. He's been sickly since winter. Her voice held a mixture of pride and worry, but he has his father's spirit. The horses need me, Samuel insisted between sips. Of water, father's promise. Another cough shook his thin frame. Your father's promise is safe with us, Andrew assured him. He saw something of himself in the boy's determined eyes, the same stubborn devotion to duty that had brought him to this valley. You need rest first, Liza said firmly. Andrew, there's a small bedroom off the main hall. I'll make it up. Proper, he nodded, already heading for the linen chest. The spare room had been used for storage, but it would serve well enough for the boy. While Liza tended to Samuel, Andrew cleared the room and set up a bed. He found himself taking extra care with the task, smoothing the quilt with calloused hands, positioning the pillow just so. It had been years since he'd prepared a bed for anyone, but himself got by mid-morning. Samuel was settled in the fresh bed, though he protested that he should be helping outside. His eyes kept straying to the window where the herd could be seen, grazing in the distance. Rest now, Liza murmured, smoothing his dark hair. The horses will wait. Andrew spent the day repairing fence posts, his mind turning over this new development. He'd grown comfortable with Liza's presence, even begun to depend on it, but a sick child changed things. Added responsibility. Added risk. Yet when he saw Samuel later that afternoon, standing shakily by the corral, something shifted in his heart. The boy was singing softly in Apache, his clear voice carrying on the breeze. The nearest horses had lifted their heads, ears, pricked forward with interest. Storm Crow, usually the wariest of the herd, drifted closer to the fence. The great black stallion stretched his neck toward Samuel, nostrils flaring gently. The boy reached out one thin hand, still singing. The horse's muzzle touched his palm. Andrew found himself holding his breath. He'd never seen anything like it. Even Liza, who had a way with the herd, couldn't get this close to Stormcrow. "He has the old gift," Liza said quietly, coming to stand beside Andrew, like his father. The horses recognized it. They watched as more of the herd drew near, drawn by Samuel's song. The boy's face glowed with joy, despite his obvious fatigue. After a few minutes, his voice faltered, and Andrew stepped forward. "Time to rest some more, son," he said, the term slipping out naturally. "The horses will be here tomorrow." Samuel allowed himself to be led back inside, leaning slightly on Andrew's arm. His skin felt too warm, and his breathing was labored again, but his eyes shone with contentment. That evening, Andrew found himself taking special care of his supper. He set the table properly, using the good plates his uncle had left behind. Liza raised an eyebrow, but said nothing as she helped Samuel to his chair. The boy looked small at the big table, but he sat straight-backed, dignity in every line of his posture. Steam rose from bowls of beef stew, and the bread was fresh from the oven. For a moment, Andrew felt the weight of his wife's absence keenly. She would have known exactly how to make this moment perfect. Then, surprising himself, he bowed his head. "Lord," he said, his voice rough with disuse but growing stronger, "we thank you for this food. For this day, for," he paused, opened his eyes to look at Liza and Samuel, "for bringing us together at this table." "Amen," Samuel said, softly, smile lighting his tired face. They ate together, passing bread and sharing the day's small events. Samuel spoke of the horses he'd seen, naming their colors and markings with careful precision. His eyes grew heavy as the meal progressed, but pride kept him upright. "You've got away with them?" Andrew said. "Never seen Stormcrow take to anyone like that. The old ones say some people are born with horse medicine in their hearts," Liza explained. Samuel's father was the same. The boy ducked his head at the praise, but pleasure showed in his face. He stifled another cough. "Time for bed, I think," Liza said gently. Samuel started to protest, but yawned instead, got as Liza helped Samuel to his room. Andrew began clearing the table. The kitchen felt different somehow, warmer, more alive. He could hear Liza's soft voice singing what must be an Apache lullaby, the ancient melody weaving through the house like a blessing. When she returned, they worked together and comfortable. Silence, washing dishes and putting food away. Finally, Liza spoke. "Thank you," she said simply, "for making space for him here." Andrew dried his hands carefully before answering. "It's his home too now," he said, "long as he needs it." Through the window, moonlight silvered the grass where the herd grazed peacefully. In his new room, Samuel slept, his breathing finally easy. And in the kitchen, Andrew and Liza continued their quiet work. The rhythm of their movements as natural as if they'd been doing this together for years. The morning after Samuel's arrival, Andrew woke early to find the boy already at the kitchen table, wrapped in a blanket against the dawn chill. His thin fingers traced the grain of the weathered wood as he gazed out the window at the horses grazing in the distance. "Couldn't sleep?" Andrew asked, stirring up the cook stove's embers. Samuel shook his head. "I hear them moving out there, like thunder in my dreams." Andrew understood. The sound of the herd had kept him awake those first nights too, though now it had become as natural as his own heartbeat. He set about making breakfast, measuring coffee grounds with care. Liza appeared, shortly after, carrying fresh herbs from her morning gathering. The kitchen filled with the sharp, clean scent of sage and mint as she prepared tea for Samuel's cough. The boy wrinkled his nose, but drank it dutifully under her watchful eye. "Today," Andrew said, setting plates of cornbread and eggs on the table, "I thought I might show you how to repair some tack. Can't have broken reins when we're working with the horses." Samuel's face brightened. "I can help." "Course you can." "Need somebody with nimble fingers for the fine stitching?" They settled into a rhythm over the next few days. Mornings began with Liza's herbal remedies and Andrew's simple but filling breakfasts. Samuel's cough, while still present, grew less. harsh under Lisa's careful treatment dot and attack room. Andrew showed Samuel how to clean and oil the leather, explaining how each piece fit together. The boy's hands were steady as he learned to punch holes and thread the heavy needle through tough leather. "My father used to make his own bridles," Samuel said quietly one afternoon, running his fingers along a worn rein. "But different from these," Andrew nodded, understanding the boy was sharing something precious. "Maybe you could show me sometime when you're stronger." Small moments of laughter began to pepper their days. Samuel's startled giggle when a young colt stuck its head through the corral fence to snuffle his pockets for treats. Liza's quiet chuckle when Andrew tangled himself in rope while demonstrating proper coiling technique. Even Andrew found himself smiling more, the grief in his heart giving way to something warmer. On the fourth morning, Andrew settled his gentlest mare for Samuel. "Think you're up for a short ride? Want to show you something?" Liza looked concerned but didn't object when Samuel nodded eagerly. She helped him mount, adjusting the stirrups with careful hands. "Not too far," she cautioned Andrew. "And mind? The wind? It's cool today." They rode slowly along the ridge that overlooked the valley, Samuel wrapped in an extra blanket against the morning chill. The herd grazed below, spread out across the grassland like scattered shadows. "See that black stallion there?" Andrew pointed. "That's Stonecrow. He leads the main band. And over there, the dun with the white mane? We call him Sundog. He keeps the yearlings in line." Samuel leaned forward in the saddle, taking in every detail. "They're like a family," he said softly. "The way they move together, protect each other. Reckon they are at that." Andrew watched as Amare nudged her foal toward better grazing. "Your aunt and I, we've been trying to keep them safe, like family should." Samuel turned to him, dark, eyes serious. "We have to protect them. Father said the old ones believed the horses carry prayers to heaven in their running." Andrew felt something catch in his throat. He thought of his own prayers, scattered and desperate since losing his wife. But here, watching the herd move like water across the land, he could almost believe in such things. They returned to find. Lisa had prepared a hot meal, her worry easing when she saw Samuel's bright eyes and flushed cheeks. The ride had tired him, but it was a good sort of tired, the kind that comes from joy rather than illness. That evening, as shadows lengthened across the valley, Andrew brought out his mother's old Bible. The leather cover was worn smooth by years. Handling. He set it on the kitchen table, where the lamp cast a warm circle of light. Samuel watched curiously as Andrew opened it. "Will you read to us?" Andrew hesitated. He hadn't read scripture aloud since his wife's passing. But something about the boy's earnest question and Lisa's quiet presence beside him gave him courage. "The Lord is my shepherd," he began, his voice growing stronger with each word. "I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures." The familiar words filled the kitchen. Outside, the horses moved through the gathering dusk, their hoofbeats a gentle counterpoint to his reading. When he finished the psalm, Liza began to sing softly in Apache, a melody that seemed to rise and fall like wind through grass dots. Samuel sat between them, eyes half closed, swaying slightly to the song's rhythm. The lamp's glow caught the plains. Out of his face, so like his aunt's, yet with a gentleness all his own. The moment felt holy, though they were far from any church. No organ played, no preacher spoke, but Andrew felt the presence of something greater than himself in that humble kitchen. It reminded him of summer evenings with his wife, when they would sit on their porch and watch the sun paint the sky in colors no artist could capture. The thunder of hooves drew closer as the herd passed near the house, heading to their nighttime grazing grounds. Samuel went to the window, pressing his palm against the glass. "They're saying good night," he whispered. Andrew joined him, laying a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder. Through the window, he could see the horses moving like spirits through the gathering dark, manes and tails flowing in the evening breeze. Stars were beginning to appear above the ridgeline, bright and clean as new-minted silver. For the first time since receiving his uncle's telegram, Andrew felt truly at home. The ache of his wife's absence would always be there, but It was joined now by something new, the warmth of Liza's quiet strength, Samuel's trust, and the wild beauty of the herd they all sought to protect. This wasn't the family he had imagined. For himself, formed not by blood, but by shared purpose and growing love. Yet standing there, with Samuel leaning slightly against him and Liza humming softly as she banked the fire, Andrew knew it was no less real for being unexpected. Together they had made something sacred of this ground, not through ceremony or declaration, but through daily acts of care. Brewing tea for a sick child, mending tacks side by side, sharing prayers beneath the vast Colorado sky. The horses thundered past, their hoofbeats echoing like an amen. The morning sun cast long shadows across the valley when they first heard the horses approaching. Andrew stood from where he'd been mending a fence post, shading his eyes against the glare. 5 riders approached in a tight formation, their badges glinting. "The railroad men," Liza said quietly beside him. "And U.S. Marshals." Andrew's stomach tightened as he recognized Thomas Granger at the lead, the railroad agent's neat suit out of place against the rugged backdrop. Marshal Harlan Fitch rode beside him, his weathered face stern beneath his wide-brimmed hat. Samuel appeared in the ranch house doorway, watching with worried eyes as the men dismounted. Andrew gestured for him to stay back. "Mr. Merriman," Granger called out, brushing dust from his sleeve. "We've come with some official business to discuss." The group gathered around the wooden table Andrew had dragged onto the porch that morning. Marshal Fitch pulled a stack of papers from his saddlebag, laying them out with deliberate care. "These documents," Granger began, his voice smooth as polished stone, "show that your uncle signed away grazing rights to this valley before his death. The railroad holds legal claim to this land and everything on it." Andrew's hands grew cold as he examined the papers. His uncle's signature sprawled across the bottom of each page. The ink faded, but unmistakable. "That can't be right." The deed gives you the house and immediate surroundings," Marshal Fitch interrupted. "But the grazing rights were sold separate, legal and binding." Liza stepped forward, her spine straight as a fence post. "These horses are protected by older promises." She pulled a worn leather pouch from her belt, extracting a carefully folded paper. "My brother and Andrew's uncle had an agreement. The herd was to remain free, under our protection." The marshal barely glanced at the document. "Ma'am, any private arrangement between your brother and the deceased holds no legal weight against properly filed railroad contracts." "No weight?" Liza's voice cracked like summer lightning. "My brother died protecting these horses. His promise is sacred ground." Samuel's cough suddenly echoed from the doorway, harsh and racking. The boy had crept closer to listen, and now he doubled over, his thin shoulders shaking. Liza rushed to him, supporting him, as he struggled to catch his breath. Andrew watched helplessly as the boy's face grew pale, the coughing fit worse than any in recent days. "Please," Andrew turned back to the officials. "We need time." "The boy's sick, and the herd 2 weeks," Granger cut in. "You have 2 weeks to clear out. The herd will be rounded up and sold at auction. The railroad's schedule won't wait for sentiment." 2 weeks? Andrew's voice rose. "There's 150 horses out there. You can't just... We can and... We will." Marshal Fitch stood, gathering the papers. "This land belongs to the railroad now. Clear out peaceful-like, and we won't have trouble. Resist, and we'll remove you by force." The other marshals shifted their coats, revealing holstered revolvers. The message was clear. As Mountain Water Dot, they watched the riders disappear back down the valley road, dust rising behind them like smoke from a funeral pyre. Samuel's coughing had eased, but he remained pale, leaning against Liza's side. Inside the ranch house, Andrew paced the worn floorboards while Liza brewed more of her herbal tea for Samuel. The boy lay on his bed, exhausted from the coughing spell. His breathing still ragged, evening crept in like a thief, stealing the last light from the windows. Andrew sat heavily at the kitchen table, his head in his hands. "My uncle's sins come down on us all," he said finally. "Maybe I'm cursed, bringing trouble to everyone I care for." He thought of his wife's death, how helpless he'd been to save her. Now history seemed to be repeating itself. Another family slipping through his. Fingers.Lisa moved quietly across the room. Her hand came to rest on his shoulder, warm and steady as summer earth. Faith is tested at the edge of loss, she said softly. That is when we must hold strongest. Andrew lifted his head. Through the window, he could see the herd grazing in the failing light. They moved like shadows across the grass, peaceful and unaware of the threat hanging over them. The lead stallion, Storm Crow, stood apart from the others, his head raised as if scenting danger on the wind. What faith? Andrew's voice was rough. The law's against us. The railroad's against us. Even my own uncle betrayed everything this land stood for. Faith in what's right, Lisa answered. Faith in promises that run deeper than paper and ink. She glanced toward Samuel's room. Faith in the family we've made here. The boy's quiet breathing carried from the other room, finally steady in sleep. Andrew thought of how Samuel's face had lit up when they rode together, how he sang to the horses in his grandfather's tongue. He thought of Liza's unwavering dedication to her brother's word, and how she brought life back to this empty house. Outside, a horse nickered softly in the gathering dark. The sound carried through the window like a question, waiting for him. Answer. Andrew stood slowly, his chair scraping against the floor. 2 weeks, he said. They gave us 2 weeks to find a way. Liza's hand slipped from his shoulder, but her presence remained steady beside him. Together they watched the herd. Through the window, their shadows long and dark against the pale grass. The setting sun painted the valley in shades of amber and purple, a beauty that seemed to mock their despair. Yet even in that moment of darkness, Andrew felt something stirring in his chest. Not hope exactly, but a fierce determination. These horses, this land, this small family they'd pieced together from grief and promise, it all meant something larger than property rights and railroad schedules. The herd continued grazing peacefully, unaware that their fate hung in the balance. Storm Crow raised his head again, his dark form silhouetted against the dying light. For a moment, he seemed to look directly at the house, at the people watching from the window. Then he lowered his head back to the grass, trusting in the coming. Night and the strength of his herd in the ancient rhythms of the land. The simple gesture struck Andrew like a physical blow. Here was faith made flesh, carrying on despite all human schemes and sorrows. Liza moved to check on Samuel, her footsteps soft on the wooden floor. Andrew remained at the window, watching. Darkness claimed the valley. 2 weeks stretched before them like an impossible canyon to cross. But as the first stars began to appear above the ridge, he made a silent vow to the herd, to Samuel, to Liza, to this land that had somehow become home. He would find a way. They would find a way, together. The night settled around the ranch house like a heavy blanket, full of questions without answers. But for now, they had this moment, the quiet breathing of a sleeping boy, the steady presence of shared purpose, and the sound of wild horses moving through the dark. Still free beneath the rising moon. The days following the marshal's visit brought a heavy silence to the ranch house. Samuel's cough grew worse, each fit leaving him weaker than before. Andrew watched helplessly as the boy struggled to breathe, dark circles forming under his eyes like bruises. One morning, after another sleepless night filled with Samuel's rasping breaths, Andrew found himself standing in the doorway of the boy's room. Liza sat beside the narrow bed, wringing out a cool cloth to place on Samuel's forehead. "This is my doing," Andrew whispered, his voice rough with guilt. "All this worry, this fight, it's making him sicker." Liza didn't look up from her task. He was ill before. The season changes always bring fever. But Andrew couldn't shake the weight pressing down on his shoulders. He watched Samuel's chest rise and fall with effort, each breath a battle. The morning sun streaming through the window seemed to mock their troubles, painting cheerful patterns on the faded quilt. "I need to ride into town," Andrew said finally. "See if the doctor has anything stronger for his cough." Liza nodded, her fingers gentle as she smoothed Samuel's dark hair back from his damp forehead. "Take Storm Shadow," she said, naming one of the steadier ranch horses. He's fastest. The ride into town felt longer than usual, each hoofbeat matching the rhythm of Andrew's worries. The main street was busy with morning traffic. Wagons creaking, shopkeepers sweeping their boardwalks. Women hurrying between errands with baskets on their arms as Andrew tied Storm Shadow to the hitching post. Outside the doctor's office, he heard the whispers start. They followed him like shadows as he crossed the street. There's the fool fighting the railroad, throwing good money after bad. Taking up with that Indian woman. Andrew's jaw tightened, but he kept walking. The doctor's office was cool and dim after the bright morning sun. Dr. Wells listened to Andrew's description of Samuel's symptoms, his face growing grave. "I'll give you what I can," the doctor said, measuring dark liquid into a bottle. "But that boy needs rest. Real rest, without stress or excitement." Andrew's hands clenched around his hat brim. "Much obliged," he managed, laying coins on the counter dot outside. The whispers had grown bolder. A group of men lounged against the general store's wall, watching him with poorly hidden smirks. "Heard you're getting run off that worthless ranch," one called out. "Serve you right for taking up lost causes." Andrew's feet carried him toward the church before he realized where he was heading. The small white building sat quiet and empty, but Reverend Dawson was in his study, writing his Sunday sermon. The old preacher looked up as Andrew entered, taking in his troubled expression. "Sit down, son," he said, gesturing to a worn wooden chair. "You're carrying a heavy load this morning." The whole story spilled out: Samuel's worsening condition, the railroad's threats, the townspeople's mockery. Andrew's voice cracked as he finished. "Maybe they're right. Maybe I'm just bringing more suffering to those who don't deserve it." Reverend Dawson was quiet for a long moment, his weathered hands folded on his desk. "You know your scripture," he said finally. "What does the Lord say? About defending the fatherless and the widow?" "That he watches over them," Andrew answered automatically. "That he's a father to the fatherless, a defender of widows." "And do you think that watching over includes giving up when trouble comes?" The preacher's eyes were kind but firm. "The Lord defends those who cannot defend themselves. Sometimes. He does that through people willing to stand for no matter the cost." Andrew thought of Samuel's trust, of Liza's unwavering faith in her brother's promise. "But what if I fail them?" "Then you fail trying to do right," Reverend Dawson said simply. "Better that than succeeding at what's wrong." The ride home seemed shorter, though darkness had fallen by the time Andrew approached the ranch house. A lamp burned in Samuel's window, its warm light a beacon in the gathering night. Inside, he found Liza sitting beside Samuel's bed, singing softly in Apache. The boy's breathing seemed easier, though his face was still flushed with fever. The medicine bottle felt heavy in Andrew's pocket. "I almost gave up today," he admitted quietly, after measuring out the doctor's prescription. Rode into town feeling like everything was lost. Liza's song faded to silence. "But you came back. I came back." Andrew sank into the chair on the other side of Samuel's bed. "The preacher reminded me some things are worth fighting for, even when the fight looks hopeless." "My people know about hopeless fights," Liza said, her voice carrying no bitterness, only truth. "We fight anyway. Because giving up means losing more than land or horses. It means losing who we are." Samuel stirred, his eyes fluttering open. "The horses," he whispered, his voice thin but clear. "They belong to those who love them." Andrew leaned forward, taking the boy's small hand in his. "Rest easy, son. We're not giving up." Through the open window came the sound of the herd moving in the darkness, hooves steady on the familiar ground. Andrew settled deeper into his chair, determined to keep watch until dawn. His body ached with exhaustion, but his mind was clearer than it had been in days out tomorrow. They would begin looking for ways to challenge the railroad's claim. There must be other documents, other witnesses who knew about his uncle's arrangements with Liza's brother. The law might be on the railroad side, but truth and justice had to count for something. Samuel's breathing had steadied into sleep, his hand still trustingly wrapped in Andrew's larger one. Liza resumed her quiet singing. the ancient melody weaving through the night air like a prayer. Outside, an owl called once, sharp and clear. The herd moved closer to the house, as they often did at night, their presence a reminder of what they were fighting to protect. Not just horses, but a way of life. A family pieced together from broken promises and shared faith. The lamp flickered low as Andrew kept his vigil, waiting for the dawn and whatever it might bring. The morning sun had barely crested the hills when Andrew and Lisa mounted their horses for the long ride to the reservation agency. They'd left, Samuel in good hands. Reverend Dawson had promised to watch over the boy, tending to both his physical needs and his spirits with gentle care. 2 days there and back, Andrew said, checking his saddlebags one final time. If we push hard. Liza nodded, her face set with determination. The reservation agency lay far to the south, through rough country that tested both riders and mounts. They rode in companionable silence, stopping only to water the horses and share jerky and hardtack at midday dot by nightfall. They made camp beneath a stand of cottonwoods. The flames of their small fire cast dancing shadows as they discussed their strategy. They won't want to help us, Lisa said, her voice bitter with experience. The agency clerk served the government's interests, not ours. Then we'll make them look harder, Andrew replied, his jaw set. Every paper, every old document. There has to be something. Dawn found them back in the saddle, pushing through the final miles. The agency building squatted low and gray against the landscape, its windows dusty with neglect. Inside, the air hung heavy with the musty smell of old paper and indifference. The clerk barely glanced up from his desk. Treaty office is closed today, he drawled, not bothering to hide his dismissal. Liza stepped forward, her spine straight as a lance. We need to see the grazing rights records. All of them. Ma'am, those files go back decades. Then we'll look through decades, she interrupted, her voice firm but controlled. It's all right. Something in her tone made the clerk hesitate. Perhaps it was the quiet dignity, or maybe just the realization that they wouldn't leave without a fight. With obvious reluctance, he led them to a back room lined with leather-bound ledgers. Hours passed as they searched, page by dusty page. Their fingers grew grimy, their eyes strained in the dim light. Just as despair started to creep in, Liza's hand froze over a yellowed page. Andrew, she whispered, look at this. There it was. A clause in an old treaty, granting permanent grazing rights to native families' horses in the valley. The document was weathered, but the official seals remained clear and unquestionable. Andrew's hands trembled as he held the page. This is it, he breathed. This proves the herd has protected status. They carefully copied every word, then had the clerk witness their transcription. Storm clouds gathered as they began their journey home, and soon cold rain drenched them to the skin. But neither complained. Their spirits soared above the weather. That night, in the warm kitchen of the ranch house, they spread the precious papers on the table. Water dripped from their clothes, but their faces glowed with hope. Without speaking, they joined hands over the documents and bowed their heads in prayer, giving thanks for this chance to save what they held dear. The county courthouse buzzed with tension as Andrew clutched the treaty papers in his weathered hands. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting long shadows across the wooden floor. Railroad agent Thomas Granger sat with his lawyers, their suits pressed and faces confident. Your Honor, the railroad's lead attorney declared, rising smoothly. To his feet, this so-called treaty is nothing but an ancient relic. Progress cannot be held hostage by outdated agreements. Andrew's heart hammered in his chest as his own lawyer presented their case. The treaty's yellowed pages passed from hand to hand, each seal and signature scrutinized under the judge's stern gaze. Reverend Dawson approached the bench when called, his gray hair catching the morning light. I've known Andrew Merriman for years, Your Honor. He's a man of his word, seeking only to protect what's right. Liza stood next, her voice clear and strong in the hushed courtroom. My brother made a sacred promise before he died, to guard these horses with his life. That promise lives on through us. She spoke of generations of her people who had watched over the valley, of horses running free under endless skies. Judge, a man with deep lines etched in his face, held the treaty up to the light. Minutes stretched like hours as he studied each page. The courtroom grew so quiet Andrew could hear his own breathing. This seal, the judge finally spoke, is authentic. The clause remains valid under territorial law. He raised his hand as the railroad lawyers burst into protest. However, I must warn you, they will appeal. This victory may be temporary. Relief flooded through Andrew as townsfolk began to gather around them outside the courthouse. Men who had once turned away now offered handshakes. Women who had whispered behind closed doors smiled openly at Liza. "You showed real grit," old Jim from the general store said, clapping Andrew's shoulder. "Both of you did." The ride home felt lighter somehow, despite the judge's warning. As they approached the ranch, the thunder of hooves drew their attention. Samuel, his face brighter than it had been in days, ran from the porch to the corral fence. The herd galloped past in a cloud of gust and power. Samuel's laughter rang out, pure and clear as a bell, his illness momentarily forgotten in the joy of the moment. The boy's delight proved infectious. Andrew found himself grinning as he dismounted. He and Liza stood together on the porch, watching Samuel's excitement. The setting sun painted the valley in shades of gold, and gratitude swelled in Andrew's chest. Their gazes met, sharing a moment of quiet triumph, even as they both knew this peace might not last. The railroad's appeal brought dark riders who circled the ranch at night, leaving threatening notes nailed to fence posts. But when rustlers made their final desperate attempt to steal the herd, hoofbeats thundered from town. Neighbors who had once turned their backs now rode hard alongside Andrew, rifles ready. Shots crackled in the pre-dawn darkness. The rustlers, finding themselves outnumbered by determined townsfolk, fled into the shadows. As sunrise painted the sky pink, Andrew and Samuel guided the horses back to their valley, the boy sitting tall in his saddle, despite his frailty. A week later, the official letter arrived bearing the territorial governor's seal. The railroad would reroute north, leaving the valley in peace. That evening, lantern lights spilled from the ranch house windows as neighbors gathered round the long kitchen table. Reverend Dawson led them in amazing grace, while Liza served her rich beef stew. Laughter and hymns filled the once lonely house with warmth. Dawn painted the Colorado Valley in shades of gold. Andrew Merriman stood on the weathered porch of his uncle's ranch, his home, now watching the wild herd thunder across the grassland. Their manes caught the morning light like flowing honey. Beside him, Samuel leaned against his side, stronger now than in those first frightening days. The boy's eyes sparkled as he watched the horses. "They belong to all who honor them," Samuel whispered, his voice carrying the wisdom of his Apache ancestors. Liza's warm hand found Andrew's, her fingers intertwining with his. The touch sent a flutter through his heart, something he hadn't felt since losing his wife. For the first time, hope bloomed fully in his chest, hope for love, for family, for tomorrow. That evening, they gathered around the kitchen table, the lantern casting a gentle glow on their faces. Laughter came easily. Now, filling the once empty house, Andrew looked at them both, feeling the weight of grief lifting. This inherited ranch had transformed from burden to blessing sacred ground where God had knit 3 broken hearts into one family dot. If today's story reminded you of the quiet strength of love, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe, and tomorrow we'll meet right here, where love speaks softly and stays.